Good morning. Thank you for being here. This morning, we are very excited as House GOP and Senate GOP to present what is a very important issue to all of us in Minnesota. We know that literacy and the idea of our children's education is primary. We need to make sure that we are ensuring that our children are receiving from the state what they need best. Thank you for being here, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Peggy Bennett, one of the leaders that will be speaking more on the plan to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader Damath, and thank you again all for being here. My name is Peggy Bennett. I represent 23A. I live in Albert Lea and much of that middle southern Minnesota area. I am a teacher of 33 years, retired in 2015. I taught mostly first grade. Literacy is my love, because first grade is where you really dig into that. That's where you give the kids their foundation and their beginnings. And I also taught special education. First of all, I have to say it is my pleasure to be here with so many colleagues and our education team between the Senate and the House. We have an awesome team of teachers, administrators, school board members, parents on our education team who have helped formulate this Reading Reset Plan. And we all know how important literacy is. Only half of Minnesota students can read at grade level. And I'm going to say that again, half. That's a tragedy. We have no real science-based reading plan in sight, which is basically what told us we need to have action here. And what we have, this is a crisis. It's very similar to a natural disaster, a tornado or a fire, and it needs to be addressed immediately. This crisis covers our whole geographic state, and it involves our children, our most precious asset. Our kids deserve better. And as I said, only half of students in Minnesota can read at grade level. And some other statistics, 48% of third graders read at grade level, 32% of fourth graders, and 30% of eighth graders. 2/3 of our eighth graders can't read at grade level. This is a crisis. This is not the fault of teachers. It's not the fault of students or parents or even the schools. They've been lied to. And I don't use that word lightly. I always taught my first graders, you don't accuse somebody of lying lightly. But they have been lied to. Some of the most largest and popular curriculum companies have ignored decades of science-based reading, called the science of reading, and they've misled teachers and schools and told them that whole language or balanced literacy is research-based. It's not. We now have a catastrophic literary crisis in our state, and we need to deal with it like the crisis that it is. This is huge. It's generational. It has incredible implications for our state, both now and in the future, and especially incredible implications for our children, and they're precious. When children learn how to read, they're empowered to read to learn. Think of what literacy failure does to kids and to schools. It drives up the special education population. We know we're dealing with that and the costs of that right now. It widens the achievement gap, and Minnesota is the worst in the nation. It feeds into crime and prison. It causes behavior problems in schools. And I dealt with that with my first graders. When they're frustrated, when they can't read, they know that. And it causes problems. Here's our plan of action. We have a Republican team, which I talked about, made up of teachers, parents, school board members, administrators, and so on, who are addressing this plan immediately and using a science-based approach. It's called the science of reading, which we'll get into further in a little bit. This plan would create a special revenue account, not unlike a disaster relief fund for schools, where they can apply to cover the costs of aligning their curriculum to the instructional practices based on the science of reading. There's three main components of this reset fund. The first one is funding for schools to replace their ineffective curriculum. The second one is funding for teacher training and staff development in the science of reading. And the third is funding for tutoring, so the parents and families of students who have been identified as struggling readers can get help based on the science of reading. In addition, it requires the Professional Educator Licensing and Standards Board to audit our teacher prep programs to make sure that they're teaching what the current statute says, that scientifically based reading instruction is taught to our teachers. Secondly, it directs the Minnesota Department of Education to develop and maintain a list of verified curriculum, again, that's based on the science of reading. So I say enough is enough. It's time to take a bold stance and get to remediating our children, get them caught up on their reading skills, and put strong science of reading-based curriculum in our schools with trained teachers who know how to use it. We have excellent teachers in this state. We have awesome students in this state and parents, and we can do this. So thank you. I am going to hand this off to Senator Coleman now.
Good morning. My name is Julia Coleman. I represent Senate District 48, which is the eastern half of Carver County. I'm also the Republican lead on the Senate Education Policy Committee. We are 2 months into the legislative session, and to date, we have had no significant hearings or conversations regarding the science of reading, regarding the catastrophic state of reading comprehension and literacy in this state. We Republicans have been patient, but time is up. It is time to act now and treat this like the disaster it is in this state. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about our plan. The surplus provides us with a unique opportunity to reset our priorities and fix our approach to literacy with real investments in the science of reading, which are then real investments in our schools and in our students. This establishes a special revenue fund, not unlike a disaster relief fund, from which schools can apply to cover costs related to aligning their curriculum and instructional practices to the science of reading. The Reset Fund includes 3 primary components: funding for schools to invest in proven science of reading curriculum, instruction materials, and books; funding for teacher training and professional development in the science of reading. Teachers will have opportunities to be trained in the science of reading with intensive workshops and academies along with real professional development. And lastly, funding for tutoring. In one of the very first education hearings I had as a freshman senator, we had mothers from the inner cities saying, I can't afford a tutor and the schools are failing my students. Help me. This is going to answer that call for help. Parents of students identified as struggling readers will receive help for targeted tutoring based on the science of reading. The total size of the fund is still being calculated, but the funds to be set aside for targeted tutoring and for all of these goals needs to be and will be significant. To talk more about this issue, I'd like to hand it off to Representative Bakeberg.
Thank you, Senator Coleman. My name is Ben Bakeberg. I have the privilege to represent the communities of Prior Lake, Jordan, part of Shakopee, and the surrounding townships. Professionally, for my entire career, I've served as a paraprofessional, a teacher, a coach, and am currently a middle school principal. It's that perspective that I bring to the Capitol every single day. And I think about the legislation that is being passed, the good ideas that are being passed into law. What is that going to look like on May 23rd when I step back into my school and I'm leading my school? How will that good idea impact the kids, the family, and my amazing teachers and paras and cooks and custodians and bus drivers that I work with every single day? That's the perspective I bring to the Capitol. The components outlined in the Reading Reset are a good idea. They are a good idea because schools will have the money to make the purchases that they need to invest in materials founded in the science of reading. Schools will have the resources and the ability to train teachers, paraprofessionals, administrators and anyone else that they identify that works with kids that need this. And if I could just echo Senator Coleman's, training parents, it has been a missing piece that educators have known about for years. This training will help break the factory model of education that is often more supportive of structures and archaic systems and not our kids. The science of reading works. It works. Research supports it. The science of reading is hard work. There's no doubt about it. Anything good is hard work. But the alternative is to continue down a failed path that has led to 50% of our kids not being able to read at grade level. I want to take a moment and speak directly to our educators, to the people that are, quite frankly, not listening to this press conference because they're with kids right now. All of us as educators, we go into education not to push a political agenda, but because we love kids and we want to serve kids and we want to invest in the next generation. There is nothing better than when I'm working with a kid or a teacher is working with a kid on a hard concept and we're struggling through that concept, and all of a sudden that light bulb moment comes off and the kid gets it and you see the exhilaration. That is motivation for teachers. And we need to have more of that. By making a significant investment in the science of reading, more students will be able to read. More students will find their passion, and more will have those light bulb moments, and our educators will be motivated by that to continue the amazing work that they do each and every day. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Representative Mueller.
Good morning. My name is Representative Patricia Mueller. And just to give you a little bit of background of myself, I was a teacher for almost 20 years, not only here in America, but also spent 3 years teaching in China. I have completed my master's in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in literacy, and just recently completed my doctorate in education. And so this is kind of my area, and I'm very excited to be able to talk about this. My job today is to tell you a little bit why the science of reading is so important, that we hold fast to the science of reading. It is too easy to put in legislation things that would provide loopholes for our teacher prep programs and for our districts to do something that they've already been doing and that we know is failing. We know that there are people who have vested interest in keeping the system the same. And yet we are here today to say that we are drawing a line in the sand and that it is time for us to only invest in the science of reading. The science of reading is actually been something that's been researched for decades, and it is explicit, systematic, cumulative instruction about the 5 essential elements, which are phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. That means that we as fluent readers, as we are learning to read, we do read one letter at a time. There is a correlation between the letters we see on the page and the sound that they make. We are able to sound out words. We are able to look at each letter and perceive it on the page. We must be able to teach our students about how they are looking at each letter, each grapheme, and how they make that sound. Because if we are teaching them that, they are going to be able to carry that into the future as they are learning, as they're seeing new words. This means that there is a letter-by-letter processing of a word rather than whole language. Students do not learn to read innately. We do not learn simply by being surrounded by literature. We do not learn how to read simply because we are having multiple opportunities to read. While all those things are important, to learn how to read is a systematic instruction that has to be intentional. One of the reasons why this is so devastating is because our teacher prep programs are not teaching our future teachers the science of reading. In the 2020 report of the National Council of Teacher Quality, they looked at 26 Minnesota schools that have that are doing the teacher prep program for our future teachers. They found that only 5 of them receive an A rating. And an A rating doesn't mean that they're teaching all 5 components. It just means they're teaching at least 4 of the components. One of the key findings that they found of that if a teacher prep school is only doing 4 out of the 5, the one that they're most often leaving out is phonics. And phonics is the decoding, is the bedrock of how we teach the science of reading. So even if the school is only teaching 4 out of the 5, leaving out that 5th one is devastating. We've already heard from many of my colleagues up here that not knowing how to read, being illiterate, is a health crisis. It is a public safety crisis. It is a crisis in our schools. And this means that we need to stand up now and invest now. I did want, before I turn it over to Senator Duckworth, I did want to say that we have examples of this working. Just recently, our scores came out and of reading, and we saw the devastating effects of COVID and of decades of underinvestments of the science of reading. But we did see was Mississippi, who starting in 2013 had a very strong literacy plan that only invested in the science of reading. They did not allow the 3 queuing system. They trained their teachers in the science of reading. They made sure that that they had support with literacy coaches and that they only use the science of reading. And within 6 years, they went from 49th in the nation in literacy scores to 1st. Wow. And so it's important for us to know that we do see success and we know how it's done, and it's time for us to make our investments likewise. So I'd like to turn it over to Senator Duckworth. Thank you.
Well, thank you and good morning. You know, it's great to see so many colleagues here to discuss this issue. There's nothing that brings us together like the kids of Minnesota. I have a first grader right now who is living this every day, trying to learn how to read, sounding out words, bringing books home, and spending time with my wife and I, trying to help her through this process. I happened to be on the school board in Lakeville during the onset of the pandemic. I witnessed firsthand teachers, parents, kids, principals, administrators do the absolute best they possibly could to still try to help our kids learn, especially those young little kids, the critical skills they're going to need in life as it pertains to reading and literacy. And it was tough. And I'm not making it a political issue. This is not a Republican issue. It's not a Democrat issue. This is a Minnesota issue. This should be as bipartisan as it gets. And what we haven't seen so far this session is any priority being given to the critical literacy needs of our kids all across the state. And if you want to get parents fired up, you start talking about their kids. If you fail to address the issues and the struggles of their kids and their academic progress, you're going to have folks to answer to. And that's why we're here. Moms and dads of Minnesota, we hear you. We're in your corner. Teachers of Minnesota, we hear you. We want to provide you the resources and the tools you're asking for and the training that you need to help our kids succeed and to get them back on track. That's what we're asking for. That's what this is about. This is not a political statement. We've been in session for 2 months and seen bill after bill after bill come before us as a priority and move at warp speed. Yet what we're hearing from folks, what we're hearing from parents, is that they want the needs of their children to be addressed. That's what they want to be the priority. Literacy help and support and resources, that's what should be moving at warp speed. And quite frankly, that's why we're having this press conference today, because we're seeing that failure. And all that we can do is give voice to those Minnesotans out there who are struggling with it every single day. We've got moms, dads, kids, teachers in tears because they're not getting the help they need and nobody's talking about it. It might not be a fun and sexy issue to talk about literacy and helping kids learn to read, but it needs to be the priority of this legislature in this session. So you can tell I'm a little fired up. in addition to that first grader, I've got 2 other little ones, and if we don't fix this now, if we don't help kids catch up who are out of the classroom for 2 years, they're never going to. And we will have failed an entire generation. Republicans in Minnesota aren't going to let that happen. I'll be followed by Representative Creasha.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth, and to all my colleagues. What you have here is a group of Republicans who represent the passion and potential for our students. What you don't have here is the DFL who's using politics for special interest groups. To be very honest, the whole language approach is a lie. It's a scam. It's been put together by reading charlatans who've lied to our kids, our parents, and frankly, our teachers. This fraud has victimized our children and put our teachers with ineffective tools in the classroom that has not led to success. You've heard of those rates. The reading charlatans pushed the failed whole language approach and balanced literacy, leaving hundreds of thousands of children unable to read, tens of thousands of parents frustrated, and a generation of well-meaning and caring teachers demoralized. Our message is clear. To the teachers, the reading charlatans have lied to you. It's not your fault. If you are willing to put in the extra work to help our students, we will give you the tools to be successful. To our parents, the reading charlatans have lied to you. It's not your fault. We will give you the resources and the help so that your child is successful to read and get back on track. To our children, our struggling readers, the reading charlatans have lied to you. You can learn to read. We know that. We believe in you, and we will help you, and we will provide the tools for that. To the governor and the DFL, you have failed to respond to this crisis. You have failed to recognize the achievement gap and the low literacy reading rates that is a crisis in our schools today. The GOP is prepared to fight the failed reading scores, and we are prepared to put efforts together to give the students and teachers the reading tools for success that they need so that we can turn this crisis around and we can make this the priority for the state. And with that, I want to thank my colleagues. I want to thank this great group of educators and passionate representatives and senators. We can fix this. And to that, I'll turn it back over for questions.
Thank you. So are there any questions? And we do have a bill, by the way. It's ready to go. It has not been introduced yet, but it will be. So just to let you know that.
Can you explain how the funding will work? You know, it sounds like you're still figuring out how much money. I mean, what is a ballpark for substantial? And is it going to be that much every 2 years, or how will it be built, this fund?
At this point, the amount of funding is very much up in the air. We don't have targets yet that have been released, so that is something that we don't have. It will need to be a substantial amount in order to, replacing curriculum is expensive, and that's why we want to be there for the schools that want to do that and get the correct curriculum. And then training's expensive too. So I'm sorry, I don't have those amounts yet. Once the targets come out and we know how much money we have to work with, we will be able to determine that amount. And as for ongoing, at this point, this is an injection of funding that would be one time at this point. It's like a disaster relief fund, as we mentioned. Those don't go on and on. It's like a shot in the arm to just get this going, get districts able to replace this failed curriculum, get those teachers trained, get some tutors going for students. We have a lot of work to do. And in 2 years, we reevaluate and see where we're at.
Could I ask you a question about partisanship? I mean, this has been a partisan divided issue for 20, 30 years. But that seems to be breaking down a little bit of late, where you have people who were either full language advocates who are now questioning some of their own work, and you have a DFL-sponsored bill in the House on this topic. So can you address the idea as to whether you think this is in fact strictly partisan, or whether that's breaking down somewhat?
I agree totally with Senator Duckworth that this is a nonpartisan issue, a joint issue between all of us to recognize first the need, and secondly, the science of reading. And you're right, this has been, I mean, I was teaching during those wars between whole language, balanced literacy, phonics, and it's like, I don't know how it became political. It should never have become political, because we should never politicize our children. And reading, my goodness, of all the non-political things, that should not be a part of that. So We do have, I believe there are, my colleagues, I know there are colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I've talked with them. I'm working with some of them. There's a struggle. You'll have to talk to them to see what the struggles are, but we just know that we have not seen that prioritized right now. And that's frustrating to me and to the rest of these colleagues standing here and who are out, and I'm sure to some of those across the aisle as well. It's time to just take the bull by the horns and get going on this and stop the any partisan bickering should not happen. And I'm looking to actually unify all of us in this. That's what needs to be done.
Anything of value in that?
Representative Chris, I wanted to say.
Thank you. I just wanted to, and I wanted to help with that question a bit as well from what I see. We can use the word partisanship, but let's talk about the tools. Committee hearings, targets, and priorities. And until we actually get committee hearings, we have folks in both bodies from the Republican side that if you want a number on this, give us a committee hearing. Give us the ability to talk through this problem and put a solution in front of you, and the majority has not done that. Yes, the DFL has a bill out there. They have 3,000 ideas and 2,222 bills in the House. And they're moving things, but no priorities on this. So I will be clear on this. I mean, we are down here in a political realm where you use the tools to get to resources. We need a hearing. We need the governor and the DFL to put a priority on fixing this crisis, and let us be part of that solution. Don't lock us out. What you're seeing right now is legislation moving through both bodies at a lightning speed with no real solutions towards fixing the reading and literacy rates.
Did you see any value in the Ailson bill?
They have a delete all out right now, and they can't even figure out their language. So until they get us to the table, right now they're just working with special interest groups.
I can't remember who said this at some point, but they sort of said someone is blocking this.
Yeah.
I mean, are you talking about teachers union? Who are you referring to in terms of
The
blocking?
adults and special interest groups on the DFL side and the governor's office, if they wanted this done, we've already passed bills in the Senate. We've already passed bills that have been on the governor's desk. Why isn't this there too? And it's because the adults that they highlighted in the special interest groups are blocking this because they don't want to give up the idea of their whole language and the scams they've done. Let's move to the science of reading. Let's go where the facts are telling us, and let's pass this.
Dr. Mueller, question? Why don't you go upstream in this bill, meaning to teacher prep programs? I mean, if you change from
Sure.
when they get in the building down.
Right.
And Principal Bakeberg is still getting young teachers who are trained in that way, why aren't you going upstream?
Well, that is the goal. The goal is to actually be able to go in and change. We would, frankly, we don't like mandates here in the side of the aisle, and so we are showing that when we offer best practices to our teachers, they want to be trained in it and they want to do them. But we are in charge of being able to tell MDE and Pelsby, yeah, you need to mandate the science of reading for your teacher prep schools. And frankly, being in the minority, you're not able to do that right now. It's been a question I've asked several times. I've asked in committee hearings about how come we're not doing this. I've also been told that we just need to start here. And if we can start here, then we can go back and continue. But the truth is that reading doesn't stop after third grade. Matter of fact, as Representative Bennett talked about, we do make that shift from reading to learn to learning to read to reading to learn. We do make that shift. And so all teachers, frankly, need to be able to understand not only the science of literacy, but then making that progression forward of what is disciplinary literacy. And that gets into a whole other thing that I can talk about at a different time. As I said, I could talk about this for a long time. Please, Senator Duckworth.
Specific to your question about trying to fight this upstream, Senator Roger Chamberlain was a little bit ahead of his time in this. We spent the last 2 years trying to do exactly what you just described. Republicans had about $50 million set aside and teed up in what was supposed to be the compromised education bill, in addition to nearly $1 billion toward the special education cross-subsidy last year. All Republicans on the conference committee voted to pass that bill. Our friends across the aisle did not. And a part of that $50 million was specifically for literacy, specifically for the letters training program, to help teachers who came and testified before the Senate Education Committee in tears, saying they felt like they failed kids because they were never taught the science of reading. And they found out about it afterward. It blew their minds, and they said, my God, this is what we need to be teaching to our kids. They are begging and pleading for us to make it a part of the licensing requirements in terms of that instruction. So we've been fighting this battle to push the science of reading upstream and get it to teachers as early as possible so it can permeate across the state, find its way into classrooms and with our kids. When I grew up, I heard commercials for Hooked on Phonics.
Yes.
I haven't heard any of those commercials in quite some time. We know that's what works. I'm going to say this a little bit tongue-in-cheek. We've been told to follow the science for a long time over the last few years. Folks, we are following the science on this. It's in the name of the program, the science of reading. It's been proven. It has to be about phonics and sounding out words and helping kids learn the mechanics of reading. That's what has to happen, and it needs to be a priority. And I think there is some bipartisanship there. Let's just admit it. The studies are out there now. There's the data to back it up. The science proves this is the method. Let's go all in on it from both sides of the aisle and finally make it the priority it needs to be for us to turn around what we're experiencing in this state and to put our kids first.
House members, we have to run to session now in just a few minutes here, but if Senate members would like to stay and answer more questions, you are welcome to. But we unfortunately have to get running.
Let me make one quick comment to your point. That is part of this plan. We have, in this bill, Pellsby would be required to audit the teacher prep program and make sure that they are addressing the science of reading in that program. So that's part of it. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate